I wrapped the knife blade with 2 layers of blue tape to provide an airspace between the Kydex and the blade to help prevent the blade from getting scratched. I skipped the whole pressing part. There's not really a lot to explain with that. You heat it up and you press it. You can watch any video on YouTube to see how to do that. Start out by drawing a line right along the edge of the blade. I came back about a 1/2 inch away from that, and that's where I'm going to make my cut. This is 060 Kydex. I never have used the 080 Kydex. The 060 seems to work just fine for smaller knives. At the top of the sheath, I went up at an angle. The angle kind of provides a ramp for when a knife is slid in and out. It makes it a lot easier to get the knife in. Right there, I'm just cutting away the excess because it's a lot easier to go back and make a final cut when you don't have the excess Kydex in your way. And once done, I'm just going to cut away the excess. And then go back and make the final cut. I'm just using a regular pair of 10 snips. They work pretty well for cutting the Kydex. This is 6 to 7 ounce leather. I'm being real careful when I roll it over not to let it slide, because I want to try to get the mark as close as possible where it should be. On that side, I'm going to allow about another 1/4 inch, and that's where I'm going to cut it. And I'll do the final trimming once I have everything glued together. Right there is where I'm going to fold it over to make the belt loop. I found it's a lot easier just to kind of play it by ear on making a knife sheath, because I've tried making knife sheaths before where I planned everything out and measured everything and had to try to make everything precise, and it took me forever, and the sheath just didn't turn out very well. I always resharpen my utility knife blades just to save on blades. I don't see any sense in changing it out every time it gets dull when you can just sharpen it up real quick. I'm tracing at the top of the Kydex. That's going to give me the point of where I'm gonna dye the leather, and also when I put the glue on it, because I don't want to have the glue running up past the Kydex. And that line is where the front of the sheath is going to fold over. And I'm drawing it about a 1/4 inch above the Kydex, so that way it'll be covering. You won't see the Kydex from the outside of the sheath. That gives you an idea of what I'm going for right there. I have some copper rivets. I've never used copper rivets before, and I know that they're supposed to be really good. So I was kind of anxious to try them out, and I really do like them. I'm just drawing the center of it, where I'm going to punch the hole. It was kind of tough to punch, but it wasn't too bad. Using that punch, it's a lot cleaner than drilling it, because when you drill Kydex, the shavings go everywhere, and you gotta clean up the shavings and whatnot. You gotta clean up the surfaces of it. We'll go ahead and draw me a line, center line of where I want to put my rivets, and get the other ones punched. And I want to have one more in the middle of those. Yeah, that looks pretty close. I'll put it right there. I'm just going to press into the leather so I have a little indentation so I know where to put the hole. And I went ahead and punched the other 2 holes through the leather. I'm just figuring out where I want to put the belt loop at. I wanted to make sure it was below the below the knife handle. That way it wouldn't be sticking out too far. Kind of drawing a center on that, and where I want to place the rivets on the belt loop. I was going to show you how neat and clean I am with leather dye, but instead I found out that my bottle leaked. The dye comes with a wool dauber, and I found it's easy just to bend the top of the handle over and just leave it inside the bottle of dye. That way you don't have a messy dauber to try to clean up every time you use it. I'm using a chocolate colored dye.
I'm gonna put it over here by my scissors. My scissors don't need to be left out here either.
I'll go ahead and get the belt loop riveted in place. The washers that go on the back of the rivets, they fit really tight, and I don't have the proper tool to set them, so I'm just using a hole punch. I'm using DAP Weldwood contact cement. I brushed it all over the Kydex sheath, and now I'm going to apply it to the inside of the leather. And you let this stuff dry until it is no longer tacky, and it sticks to itself really well. I'm using the rivets to line everything up to make sure I have it placed just right, because once this stuff sticks together, you can pull it apart, but it's not very easy. I really wouldn't want to mess everything up by not having it lined up right. I'm just going to work the sheath around, trying to keep it as tight as I can to the sheath. Or try to keep the leather as tight as I can to the sheath. Thing's looking pretty good. I went ahead and drilled the holes to the other side with a 9/64 drill bit. And I'm going to set those rivets. If I had it to do over again, I would have waited on setting those rivets until I had the holes for the stitching drilled. And I forgot to show earlier how those rivets work. You just cut the backs off of them with the pliers and peen the end over. I always think it looks cool hammering something fast forward. I'm going to sand the other side of the leather flush with the Kydex. I have a brand new belt on my sander. You don't want to try to sand leather with an old belt, it'll just burn it. You can see it taking off material really well. That's an 80 grit belt, and I have a 4x36 sander.
You want to quit, son?
When you sand the leather, it leaves like a floppy edge. It looks pretty bad, so I have an edge beveler. I'm going to use it to clean up the edge right there.
Look how bad he is. Well, search your eye.
And give it a nice uniform look.
See, take a picture of this big old pot belly. What are you doing to it now?
That edge off of it. The sandwich, yeah, the sandwich with the floppy edge.
He's pulling your hair through cat hole or whatever.
I'm going to mark a center line for my stitching. Just going down the center of the rivets. I have a stitching wheel or an overstitcher. I'm going to run that along the leather, and that's going to give me my pattern for my stitching. I'm going to use a Q-tip to go ahead and dye the sanded edge of that sheath. I didn't want to use the wool dauber because it would have been too much dye. I'm using a 5/64 drill bit. I have done a little bit of work with leather and Kydex and used a 16th inch drill bit, and it was just too small. It was really hard to pull my last few stitches through. I think this larger bit will really help, even though it's not much larger. The whole 64th. This is why I said that if I had it to do again, I would wait till the holes were drilled before I'd put the rivets in, because the Kydex shavings, they filled up the gap in there and caused the sheath to kind of separate. So I had to use the back of that knife blade to scrape the shavings out. The knife blade was a little sharp. I'm using artificial sinew and a couple hand stitching needles. Hand stitching needles have a blunt tip on them, so it makes it easy to follow a pre-made hole. If you try to use sharp needles, they would go wherever they wanted to go. They wouldn't necessarily follow the hole that you have drilled. I got about a 6-foot piece of string, or the artificial sinew. Push it through the first hole and pull everything, make sure it's centered. Second hole, and I'm going to go back through that same hole with the other needle. Again, I'm pull everything centered, pull it tight. On the next hole, and then go right in the same hole with the next needle. Stitching this way, it lets you keep a even looking stitch, and when you get to the end of the stitch, you can pull it real tight and keep good tension on it. And I'll just keep repeating the process till I get to the end. And at the end of it, I will double back 3 or 4 stitches and then cut the thread off, and that's it. You don't have to tie any knots or anything. It's pretty tough pulling that last stitch through. I thought I had broke a needle. I love those little vice grip pliers. They come in handy for everything. That's it. I'll cut the thread off and it'll stay there. After I'm done with the stitching, I'll run that overstitcher back over it. It'll kind of clean up the stitches and make them look a little bit more uniform. Focus. There we go. And that's it. hope y'all enjoyed watching. I should have shown a little more, I guess, on how the retention is, but the sheaths have a really good retention. Those knives are not coming out of there. Thank y'all for watching.